heavy, the kind that didn't give even a squeak when you pushed it open. The room was a mausoleum of forgotten moments, the air thick with the scent of old perfume and medicine. The bed was massive, a four-poster that looked like it had been carved from a single tree, the kind you see in movies where monsters hide underneath. The bedspread was a quilt that looked like it had been sewn together from the fabric of 1,000 forgotten dresses, each square telling a silent story of its own. The dresser was a towering monolith, its surface cluttered with photographs of people he didn't know, their smiles frozen in time. The mirror above it had a film over it, as if it had been used to hide something that didn't want to be seen. He stepped closer, his reflection looking back at him, distorted and ghostly. He reached out to touch the glass, and his hand passed through the mist, leaving a trail of clear condensation in its wake. The floorboards protested under his weight, but he ignored them. He had to know what was behind that door. He pushed it open, and the smell of dust and something other hit him like a wall. The room was smaller than he expected, with a single bed pushed against the far wall. The sheets were pulled tight, not a wrinkle in sight, but the pillow was indented as if someone had just been lying there. The dresser drawers were open a crack, as if someone had been searching for something and left in a hurry. On the nightstand, a photo album sat, its leather cover cracked and worn. Timmy's heart pounded as he picked it up. He knew he wasn't supposed to be in here, but the pull was too strong. He sat on the edge of the bed, his legs swinging over the side, and opened the album. The pages were thick and sticky, the pictures held in place with yellowed tape. He saw Granny, much younger, her hair still a fiery red, holding a baby that could only be his mother. There were other faces too, some he recognized from family reunions, some he didn't. Each one stared back at him, frozen in moments of joy and sorrow, a silent testament to lives lived. The demonic humming moaning started and shook Timmy to his very core, his full body engulfed in goosebumps as the photo album slams shut, booking it down the stairs in what sounded like hoarse footsteps. "Grandma! Wake up, did you hear that?" His confused grandma had not heard the demonic humming moaning. "It's just the house settling, Timmy," Granny said, her voice soothing despite the terror that washed over Timmy. She patted his head gently. "You're safe here." But her eyes told a different story. They darted around the room, searching for something that wasn't there. Timmy thought for sure she heard it too. With a sigh, Granny pushed herself up from her chair and shuffled towards the stairs. "Time for bed," she said, her voice weary. "You'll sleep down here on the couch, just like your mommy used to." Timmy nodded, not trusting his voice. He watched as she disappeared into the shadows, the thump of her slippers growing fainter until they were swallowed by the silence of the house. Alone, Timmy felt the weight of the night press down on him. He pulled the blanket up to his chin, his eyes scanning the room. The couch felt like a raft in a sea of darkness, the TV a silent sentinel that offered no comfort. The house creaked and groaned around him, the noises seeming louder without Granny's presence to distract him. He lay there, his heart racing, trying to convince himself that it was just the house settling. But the image of the photo album galloping down the stairs like a wild horse was burned into his brain. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, something that didn't belong in this world of dust and memories. He forced himself to look at the clock. It was 8:45, still early. Too early to go to sleep. He wished he had brought his Nintendo DS, something to distract him from the eerie quiet. Instead, he had only the static of the TV and the distant hum of the refrigerator to keep him company. Timmy sat up, his knees drawn to his chest. He needed a distraction, something to get his mind off the strange sounds and the creepy vibe of the house. With a deep breath, he decided to go to the fridge for a snack. Maybe something sweet would help him feel better. He padded into the kitchen, the floor cold under his bare feet. The fridge was ancient, the kind with a handle that you had to pull down firmly to open. He held his breath, hoping for a miracle. But when the light flickered on, all he saw was a sad collection of Tupperware containers filled with mystery food. There were jars of pickles, and a half-empty jug of what appeared to be prune juice. The shelves were stocked with cheese that had more mold than actual cheese and eggs that had expired 2 weeks ago. The freezer had a lone ice cube tray with 3 lonely ice cubes that looked like they had been there since the last ice age. He sighed. No gaming console, no friends, and now no snacks. Desperation set in, and he spotted a loaf of bread on the counter. It was the kind that came in a plastic bag, the kind that had more preservatives than actual bread. But it was better than nothing. He opened the cabinet and found a jar of sugar and a shaker of cinnamon. It wasn't exactly a midnight feast, but it would do. He grabbed a knife and spread a thin layer of sugar and a dusting of cinnamon on the bread. It tasted like cardboard with a hint of sweetness, but it was food. He chewed slowly, his teeth crunching through the dryness. As he ate, he couldn't help but feel like he was being watched. The fridge hummed in the background, a rhythmic reminder of his solitude. He glanced around the kitchen, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. The moonlight spilled in through the window, casting long shadows across the countertops and cabinets. Everything was still, but there was a tension in the air that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Timmy swallowed the last bite of his makeshift snack and took a deep breath. He had to get out of there. The silence was suffocating him, and the thought of going back to the living room and facing the TV's empty glow was too much. He grabbed the flashlight from the junk drawer and shone it around the room. The beam of light danced across the floor, illuminating dust motes that swirled in the air like tiny ghosts. The pantry was his next target. It was a small room, crammed with shelves that reached to the ceiling. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, the light from the fridge spilling in behind him. The shelves were packed with canned goods, all with labels that had faded to an unidentifiable brown. He scanned the rows, hoping for a miracle. And then he saw it. A jar of peanut butter, pushed to the back, untouched by time. It was a beacon of hope in a sea of despair. He grabbed a spoon and took a tentative lick. It was thick and sticky, just like it should be. It wasn't his favorite, but it was food, and it was comforting. With peanut butter smeared on his mouth, Timmy felt a little braver. He could do this. He could spend the night in this old house with the weird noises and the creepy vibe. He just had to keep moving, keep his mind occupied. He turned the TV back on, the static his new white noise, and climbed back onto the couch. He tucked the flashlight under his arm, ready to explore more of the house if he needed to. But for now, he would sit in the flickering light and hope that the night would pass quickly. As he channel surfed with the remote, the static gave way to a fuzzy image of a man sitting in a chair, his face too close to the camera. He was talking, but the volume was too low to make out the words. Timmy turned it up, and the man's voice filled the room, deep and soothing. He was selling something about a miracle cleaner that could cut through grease and grime. Timmy's eyes grew heavy as he listened to the monotonous drone of the infomercial. It was like a lullaby for grown UPS, and it was just boring enough to make him feel sleepy. He let his eyes close, the man's voice a gentle hum in the background. The TV's blue light played across his eyelids, and he felt himself drifting off. But just as he was about to slip into unconsciousness, the man's tone changed. His voice grew louder, more insistent. "Call now, and we'll throw in a second bottle for free." Timmy's eyes snapped open, and the room spun around him. The man's face grew larger and larger, his eyes bulging out of the screen. The room was spinning, the walls closing in, and Timmy felt like he was falling into the TV. And then everything went black. Timmy's eyes shot open, and he was no longer on the couch. He was standing in a field of distorted colors, the sky swirling like a kaleidoscope above him. The ground beneath his feet felt spongy, and the air was thick with the scent of something metallic and unpleasant. He looked down and saw that his legs were gone, replaced by a pair of plastic army men that marched him forward, their movements jerky and unnatural. The toys from the toy box were everywhere, their eyes following him as he moved. The Ninja Turtles were no longer smiling, their expressions were twisted into grimaces of rage. They lunged at him, their limbs stretching like taffy. The G.I. Joes had turned into a horde of screaming monsters, their weapons pointed at him. The Barbie dolls hovered in the air, their vacant eyes now filled with a malicious intent that sent chills down his spine. And in the distance, he heard the moaning, the same sound that had haunted the house. But it wasn't just the house anymore. A world of plastic and paint, where everything was off-kilter and wrong. The man from the TV was there too, his face stretched and elongated like a Picasso painting. "You're just a kid," the man sneered, his voice echoing through the air. "What do you know about the devil's work?" Timmy looked around, desperately searching for an escape. The house was a blur of shapes and shadows, the rooms melting into each other like a Salvador Dali painting. The floor was a sea of records, the needles scratching against the vinyl, playing that same haunting tune in reverse. The words "Satan see thee" repeated over and over, a chant that grew louder with each passing second. And then Peter Griffin was there, floating in the air, his hand holding a TV remote. "You should have stayed away from the grown-up channels," he taunted, his voice a mix of laughter and the sound of shattering glass. "You should have stuck to your cartoons." The TV screens grew around Timmy, their images distorting into hellish landscapes, each one more terrifying than the last. He could see his grandpa and grandma, trapped in a world of static, their faces contorted in silent screams. The house grew darker, the colors more vivid and sickening. The plastic soldiers marched in time with the chant, their tiny boots pounding against the floor. Timmy stumbled, trying to get away, but the toys had formed a wall around him. He was trapped in a nightmare, a living painting that was coming to life and trying to consume him. He screamed, the sound lost in the cacophony of noise. His heart raced, his chest tightening until he couldn't breathe. He had to get out, had to wake up. But how? He didn't know. The only thing he knew was that he didn't want to be here anymore. The walls of the house grew closer, the floor rising up to meet him. He was drowning in a sea of plastic and fabric, the toys reaching out to grab him with their stiff, unyielding limbs. The air grew colder, and he could feel the breath of something malevolent on his neck. In the chaos, Timmy heard it again, the faint sound of the backwards record playing the demonic lullaby. But it wasn't just in the background anymore, it was all around him, a part of the fabric of the nightmare. The voices grew clearer, the words more distinct. "Satan see thee," they sang, their voices rising and falling in a twisted melody that made his stomach churn. He stumbled through the living room, the furniture twisting and changing as he passed. The sofa stretched into a giant mouth, the lamp's light flickering like a tongue as it snapped at him. The clock on the mantel ticked louder, the numbers spinning backwards, counting down to an unknown doom. The house was alive, and it was angry. Timmy had to get out, had to find Granny. She would know what to do, she would make it stop. He turned to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The plastic soldiers had him pinned, their tiny boots digging into his skin. The TV screens grew larger, swallowing him whole, the images flashing from one horrific scene to another. And then, with a jolt, the screens flickered and changed. The man on the TV was gone, replaced by a new face. It was a woman, her eyes wide with fear, her voice trembling as she spoke. The murder took place in a quiet suburban neighborhood, a place where nothing like this was ever expected. Timmy's heart raced as he realized it wasn't just any documentary, it was about his own house. The images on the screens shifted, showing a grainy photograph of Granny's house, the same porch swing he had seen earlier. "This is where it all began," the woman said, her voice now cold and emotionless. The scene changed to a reenactment of a murder, the lights dimming, the shadows deepening. It was like watching a play that had been acted out countless times before. The actors moved stiffly, their movements exaggerated, but the fear in their eyes was all too real. Timmy screamed, the sound tearing through the nightmare. And just like that, the house was quiet again. The toys retreated, the walls receded, and the lights grew brighter. He was back on the couch, the TV flickering with the image of the murder documentary. The house was still, the only sound the ticking of the clock and Granny's soft snores from upstairs. He was sweating, his heart racing like a rabbit's. The TV was still on, the documentary playing out its grisly tale. He stared at the screen, unable to move, unable to believe what he was seeing. The house that had been filled with so much warmth and love was now a stage for something dark and twisted. Timmy forced himself to his feet, his legs wobbly beneath him. He stumbled to the window, his breath fogging the glass. Outside, the street was eerily quiet. The moon had disappeared behind a thick layer of clouds, leaving the neighborhood in darkness. The rows of identical white houses looked like teeth in a gaping maw, each one a silent sentinel watching over the street. The streetlights cast a cold, sterile glow over the scene, making everything look like it was coated in a layer of dust.